Hi, everybody. Welcome to Blockchain and the Law, past, present, and future. We're really happy you're here, and so many of you. Please say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're from. We're going to start any second now. Yeah, we're very happy to have Professor Neitz here as well. My colleague Sarah's on the chat, so we will get started. Hello. Hi, Sarah. Good. Everyone's here. Well, let's kick it off. So first, we want to do a little bit of housekeeping and why you're here, and talk about, how to operate in this webinar environment. So first, please, as many of you are doing, tell us where you're from, say hi. If you're at the university, please tell us which university you're from. Then my colleague Ronan is going to post some polls. So we have some questions for you. We're really interested to learn about your background and what's interesting for you in the area of blockchain law. So please participate in those. We have a questions tab. So on your screen under the chat, you see a tab for chats and a tab for questions. If you have questions for Professor Neitz, please use the questions tab. And please keep your questions regarding the topic. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. So please bear with us, and we'll collect all the questions after and try to get to the ones we are unable to respond to today. But yeah, please use the questions tab and not the chat tab to respond. Please stay in the end for two reasons. One of them is I'm going to tell you all about our Tiger Chi NFT shuffle. It means all of you who are here today are eligible to participate in the shuffle. I'll let you know how that works. And we have a really quick, super short 3-minute survey you can fill out. And some of you will be lucky winners of some nice Algorand swag. So please stay until the end to learn more about that. And then I already talked about the NFT shuffle. So with no further ado, I want to introduce Professor Neitz. She's a professor of law at the Golden Gate University School of Law in beautiful San Francisco. Hi, Federico. And she is the founding director of the Blockchain Law for Social Good Center at the Golden Gate University School of Law. So it's the first center of its kind. Algorand Foundation is very happy to support this pioneering endeavor. Michele not only has been voted the most outstanding professor 6 years in a row, she also got her JD from New York University. And just as a heads up, and I'm sure she's going to talk about more about that as well, she is running the first Blockchain Law for Social Good conference this fall in San Francisco. So if you're interested in that, please check out her website. So from here on, Michele, the floor is yours. We're very happy to have you. Thank you for making time for us. And thanks to all our attendees for coming from all over. We're excited to hear the presentation. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you so much for having me, Doro. And thank you to Algorand for inviting me to this event and for supporting the Blockchain Law for Social Good Center. So I have been asked to summarize the past, present, and future of blockchain law in 30 to 40 minutes. And I have to tell you, I teach an entire law school class on the subject. And so what I've done is tried to streamline the legal issues that are first and foremost on the minds of attorneys in this space today. And so this is the roadmap. For those of you who do not know what blockchain is, I'm going to introduce you to some of the characteristics of this new technology, as well as to some use cases. We're going to look at some past laws and difficulties that legislators have had trying to draft laws related to blockchain. I'm going to show you a traditional Supreme Court case that has been used to determine securities, whether or not something is a security, and we'll talk about how that impacts crypto. And then there are 3 aspects of blockchain I'm going to narrow in on, and that is DeFi, NFTs, and smart contracts. And we'll end by looking forward and saying what's coming up and what's happening at the moment. And the big case, as most of you know right now, is the OFAC sanctions against Tornado Cash. So we'll talk a bit about that at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so for a lot of you that already know what blockchain technology is, that's fine. For those of you who don't, this is actually part of the Blockchain Law for Social Good Center. We're trying to promote blockchain education. And I'm happy to come and talk to whoever would like an introduction to blockchain technology at another time to go into depth as to an introduction to the technology itself. For today, we're just going to focus on the characteristics of public or permissionless blockchain. And so the ones that I think are most important for folks to know about today are the fact that public blockchains are distributed, meaning they run on nodes or computers, as we call them, nodes in the blockchain space, all over the world, which means there is no central point of failure, which for those of us in California, for example, where we have a lot of natural disasters, this is a really critical point when it comes to things like records, et cetera. Blockchains are also public if they're permissionless, meaning anyone could view it at any time. It resides on the network. You can log on right now and see what's going on a public blockchain. Blockchains are also encrypted. They use public and private keys and with cryptographic tools to maintain security. I'm not going to go into that in detail today. And they're immutable. So even if you could change the information on a block, you would have to change all of the blocks on every node in the chain, which makes blockchains effectively immutable. Next slide, please. So what are some of the use cases of blockchain? Well, there's Algorand in Times Square. Obviously, cryptocurrencies is a very large use case, but there are others as well. So remittances, like global money transfers, anything that has to do with records. You'll see blockchain discussions in healthcare professions related to property titles, land records, educational records, supply chains. There's a lot going on right now with ethical fashion when it comes to blockchains. There have been a few experiments with e-voting. And when I was on the California Blockchain Working Group advising the state legislators, we talked a bit about whether or not to introduce blockchain voting in California. Ultimately, we decided it was not the right time. But these use cases are developing all the time. And so it's a very exciting space to work in as a result. Next slide, please. Okay, so part of what makes it so exciting also makes it very difficult for those trying to regulate and legislate in this space. And so I wrote an article on lessons for legislators. And one of the things that I researched was, why is this so hard for legislators? Some of the reason is intuitive, right? There's this policy tension that regulators have to face between making sure they're protecting the public and making sure that they're not stifling innovation. Another huge problem in this space that is not true in other industries is that there's no legislative definition. In fact, we struggled with this in the California Working Group. What should the definition of blockchain technology be in California? We talked a lot about that. But in an industry where you have different definitions in different states, you're already starting from behind where you want to be, because you don't actually have a definition in place. And then, of course, the high pace, or the fast pace and the high learning curve also really affect the ability of overworked legislators to learn what's required in order to legislate or regulate in this space. And then the last thing that's not on the slide is, of course, the fact that our laws in the US were basically created for intermediaries, especially financial regulations, assuming that there's a third party intermediary. And as we're about to see with crypto, there are no intermediaries. That's the whole purpose of a decentralized technology. And that raises a lot of problems for lawmakers. Next slide, please. So what are the laws that apply at the moment? Well, this is a great example of a past law that is still being used today in this space. So this is a 1946 US Supreme Court case called the SEC versus Howie. And the case was actually about a Florida orange grove, which is why you see my oranges, and trying to determine what to do around somebody offering investments in the orange grove to investors. So the Howie court determined that we have to, in order to decide whether something's going to be called an investment contract, which triggers then securities regulation and means the feds are going to be watching you, it requires four things: an investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profit to be derived from the efforts of others. So if a client goes to an attorney, like a startup, some of you may be startup developers, and you go to an attorney and you say, is my crypto asset going to be determined to be a security? This is what the lawyer will turn to and say, all right, well, let's see if it fulfills the Howie test, right? It's not always clear whether a crypto asset is a security right now, which has led to a real lack of clarity in regulation. And if you talk to anyone in the industry in the US, they will say, lack of clarity is our biggest problem. We don't have a cohesive federal framework, as I'm about to discuss at the end. Okay, so let's look at 3 separate areas. I'm going to move us from past to present to figure out how this is actually being regulated today. And I'm going to talk especially about what some of the challenges are related to regulation. And we're going to start with DeFi. For those who don't know, DeFi stands for Decentralized Finance. So let's start by asking, what is the difference between centralized and decentralized financial services? So centralized financial services is best defined as a bank, right? And as you know, there are some risks involved with having large amounts of money in the hands of just a few people, right? So I can give you an hour's worth of examples, probably an entire day's worth, right? Wells Fargo, the Wells Fargo scandal, where they were creating accounts for customers when the accounts did not even exist. You don't have to look any further than the 2008 financial crisis to say the centralized financial system doesn't always work, right? And for some populations, especially those who are unbanked or underbanked, centralized finance has not worked for decades. So as a result of all of this, there has been a real loss of trust in centralized institutions. And this is where decentralized finance has come in. So what would you need to make money or trade money without relying on a centralized institution? Well, there are 3 things that it would require. The first is infrastructure, some sort of a blockchain platform like Algorand to build you need the infrastructure to build your DeFi protocol on. Second is money, not surprisingly, right? You need some sort of a stable currency. This is where stable coins can come in. I'm not going to go too far down that road. And then third, you would need some sort of decentralized exchange, or what we would call a DEX, right? Something that's enabling you to use the smart contracts that allows users to buy, to sell, to trade, to lend, for example. With all of these things in place, you could have a decentralized financial structure. And there's something missing here, right? Which is the middleman. In DeFi, there is no middleman. From a regulatory perspective, that means that in DeFi, there is no third-party intermediary, which can lead to problems, right, for regulators. So next slide, please. So you'll remember that financial regulation presumes that there is some sort of presence of an intermediary. So with a new legal entity that doesn't have an intermediary, we have to ask some questions. Like, for example, are the tokens that are used in a DeFi protocol considered securities? You would have to go look at the securities regulatory laws. You would look at Howie and try to determine that. Are they instead a governance token? And does that mean they're not a security? There's a lot of litigation and interest floating around here with this. DeFi protocols can be outstanding for money laundering, right? And so one of the things that regulators are looking for is, are these exchanges complying with regulations like KYC, know your customer, or AML, anti-money laundering? There's been a lot of cases around that, and we'll look at Tornado Cash at the end of this presentation. And then I think there's just this overarching, how are we going to regulate a decentralized platform with regulations that are built for centralized finance that includes intermediaries? And so there's this kind of ongoing struggle going on right now to figure out how to do that. And we'll talk about ways in which the Senate is actually trying to come up with a framework to answer that. So next, thank you. What is an NFT? That's the next area we're going to be looking at. So most of you know what an NFT is. For those who don't, it is a non-fungible token. It can represent things, or it could actually be the thing. And there's some really important parts of NFTs from a regulatory perspective. And I've listed them there, and for time's sake, I won't go through all of them. I get questions a lot, like, what does non-fungible token even mean? So for those for whom this is an entirely new space, let's just point out that the non-fungible aspect of this means you can't exchange it for another thing of equal value. So if I give you $5, you don't care if it's this $5 bill or that $5 bill, right? But an NFT is unique, and it can't easily be substituted in that way, okay? Okay, next slide, please. So actually, we can skip. This is talking about the value is digital scarcity. And actually, really quick, that's just for those of you, I have students who have a really hard time. It's difficult to kind of wrap your head around this, even before you get to story aspects. The point of owning an NFT is to have a record saying that you own that picture or that video clip. Sure, others could download it, but you're going to be the person who actually owns it. And so that's an important thing as we talk about the regulatory aspects. Great, thank you. So the next regulatory aspect is public protection. There's a lot of industries that are going to be disrupted with NFTs. Land registries, gaming, fashion, DeFi, all of that could use NFTs. I have a student who wrote a paper on using NFTs for concert tickets and the way it could cut out middlemen like Ticketmaster, for example. There's all kinds of things you could do with NFTs. But public protection is an issue, right? So here's a funny tweet sent out. I'll let folks have a moment to read it about how are the police going to track down the NFT that is stolen, right? And even more importantly, for the creators of NFTs, what do you really own? What exactly is it that the creators own, and what do the purchasers own? Next slide, please. So other issues coming up with NFTs. I have a list here. I want to talk about securities. So are NFTs securities, right? Is the IRS going to tax them as property, or are they considered securities? Well, there's a case happening right now in the Southern District of New York where an employee of OpenSea, which is like an online gallery for NFTs, was in charge of determining which NFTs would go on the home page of the website. So just, it just so happens he would purchase NFTs, then put them on the website knowing that the value was going to go up, and then sell them at the higher value. This was able to be found out because blockchains are public. And so he was fired by OpenSea, and then charges were brought against him for insider trading and wire fraud. His defense to the insider trading charge is that NFTs are not securities. So if it's not a security, how can I get busted for insider trading? It's a great question. So this is a really important case to watch because by bringing a case, the DOJ is essentially suggesting that NFTs are securities. So how this case goes will matter a lot in the industry. Okay, so some of the other stuff that you folks have already looked at: money laundering, IP rights. I could do 3 classes on IP rights related to NFTs. That's a really big issue, as well as counterfeiting that's happening on OpenSea and elsewhere. Okay, let's move on to smart contracts. You can see I'm going very quickly through some very big things, right? Okay, so for those of you who are law students, what did you learn about contracts in law school? You learned that contracts are usually done on paper, or the digital version of paper. And what happens if a party does not execute on the contract? Well, you go to court and you fight over which way the contract should be determined. In a traditional contract structure, there is a well-defined system in how to do this. But if we think about what technology has done, especially what blockchain technology has done, this idea that you can store data on a ledger It's not like a piece of paper that you write it down and put it in a file cabinet or in a file on your computer. It's actually stored on nodes all around the world. And the technology exists through smart contracts to actually outline, here's what we want the contract to do, and then execute the contract itself. Okay, so that's why I call this an if this, then that is a really good way to think about smart contracts. I prefer to think of it as transaction scripts. I think that's a much better phrase for it because that's essentially what's happening here, right? Because these things are self-executing, they're also self-verifiable. And because it's on a public blockchain, it is tamper-proof. Okay? And an example of this would be escrow, that we have seen the ways in which we hand money over to a third party in an escrow situation. Once the other party has fulfilled the terms of the contract, that money is released. It's very similar to what happens in smart contracts. Now, these can be used in a lot of ways with, I mean, smart contracts are about to just explode in insurance, employment, Internet of Things. I mean, you're going to start seeing smart contracts everywhere, but there are some legal risks that we should be aware of. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to list these out, but I know we want to make sure we have enough time for questions, so I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to go through two of what I think are really important issues related to this. The first is unintended consequences. So if you have a smart contract for a car that says, as long as you pay your monthly lease payments, the car will open for you, and then you don't pay a monthly lease payment, and the contract self-executes, and the digital keys that you had to your car now shut off, and you no longer have access to the car, right? Perfectly self-executing. What if the money didn't go through because of a bank error, and now I've lost access to my car? Or what if 3 hours after the keys shut off, a child breaks his leg, and people are running to the car to try to get the child to the hospital, and they can't access the car? So who would you turn to in this sort of situation? It's really unclear. And so there are some unintended consequences that lawyers need to think about when they're working with smart contracts. Another really big issue right now is if the code malfunctions, who's liable? Is the coder liable? There's a law professor arguing that coders should have fiduciary duties, right? So that would make them liable for breach of fiduciary duty. That would mean they should have malpractice insurance. All kinds of things would flow from there. So for time's sake, why don't we go forward and talk about what's happening in the future? But these are the issues related to smart contracts that I think folks should be aware of. And again, I'm happy to do follow-up presentations and answer more questions related to that. Okay, I have to start in California, of course, my home state. So let's look to the future and what's going to be happening with blockchain law in the future. So Governor Newsom issued a really important executive order earlier this year, and he laid out 7 priorities for the state of California and asked agencies to innovate in this space. He's trying to strike that balance we've talked about between public protection, promoting innovation. And so one of the things that the policymakers in California are doing is going through and talking to stakeholders in the state, asking them, what should our blockchain regulation look like? And just so folks know, at our conference in October, we're bringing 2 of those policymakers from 2 different departments to our conference to do a workshop with stakeholders where the government policymakers are going to solicit feedback from members of the community to try to make sure that California gets it right. Next slide, please. That was my plug for our conference there. On the federal level, there's 2 pieces of federal legislation that I think the industry should really keep an eye on. And the first one is the Responsible Financial Innovation Act. I'm a little biased here because I advised Senator Gillibrand's office on how to be implementing blockchain education into the federal legislation. But this bill is designed to be a cohesive framework for how the United States will approach blockchain regulation. And it's not going to pass this year. It's something to keep an eye on next year. It might get broken up and passed in parts. We don't know exactly. But it's certainly something that folks should watch. The second bill is the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act, coming out of the Agriculture Committee of the Senate. That bill would send most authority to regulate in this space to the CFTC. So you can imagine what the SEC thinks of this particular bill. But if you're interested in this, the Ag Committee is going to be holding hearings in September that folks can listen in on to try to get a sense of what they're going to do with that bill. President Biden, of course, issued an executive order. If you're interested in doing business in the US or studying in the US, make sure you take a look at that. And I've run out of time to talk about my favorite thing, which is the battles going on between the agencies, especially the SEC versus the CFTC, and trying to figure out who's going to have ultimate jurisdiction. It's been really fun to watch. Okay, last thing. I think we're doing okay on time here. Great. So, and I did speed through some of this, so I'm happy to take questions on it. If we can go to the next slide, we could do like 4 hours on the next, on Tornado Cash, right. Okay, so those of you who are working in this space already know that on August 8th, OFAC, which is a department of the Treasury, sanctioned Tornado Cash. They added the Tornado Cash application to the SDN list. So first, let's talk about what Tornado Cash is. It is a virtual currency mixer. It allows you to anonymously mix cryptocurrency before you send it, which enables you then to mask where it came from, the origin, the destination, the counterparties, all of that can be hidden. And because it uses smart contracts, it's basically software code that is written in such a way that even the authors of the code could not edit it, which is really important, right? We talked about this, the idea that these are self-executing. As I said, this type of structure is really good for money laundering. And so the known North Korean hackers were using Tornado Cash. And so the point to make, though, is that it's also good for other things. Like, for example, if you wanted to pay workers who are women in Afghanistan without the Taliban being aware of those payments. Another example is people who want to donate to Ukraine, but for political reasons or because of safety reasons are concerned about those donations being traced back to them. So it's important for us to realize that it's not all money laundering, right? That there are very legitimate reasons that people with public addresses who could receive crypto actually need to keep that crypto private. The reason that this is such a big deal is because this is the first time that a smart contract protocol, an automated protocol, has ever been placed on the sanctions list. And the purpose of Treasury sanctions is actually to change behavior, but smart contracts cannot change behavior. And there's no one who can go to Treasury and appeal and say, wait a minute, look, we've changed our behavior, take us off the sanctions list. So as Coin Center puts it, how can we add not a person nor an entity, but an automated protocol that's not under anyone's control? So I'm going to narrow this down to 3 major legal issues going on in this case, and the reason that there's so much confusion. The first, as I said, is privacy, right? There's a lot of privacy concerns going on with this list. I mean, a lot of folks had their money in there for perfectly legal reasons, and that money has been frozen and they can't get it back. The second is free speech, right? So code is speech. So there are some constitutional issues potentially incorporated in this. And the third really big issue is criminal liability for people who worked on the open source code. And that's why this is such a big deal in the community. There was a Dutch developer who was arrested recently, and it has since come out since his arrest that he had some ties to Russian security organizations. We don't know all the facts of that arrest, and we don't know why he was arrested. But this has developers nervous that if they work on an open source code that ends up being used for ill or malicious ends, that they could actually be in a lot of trouble. And so as a result, there are lawsuits coming. Lawyers are circling. I know that EFF is looking at this. Coin Center is looking at this. They've both written great policy papers laying out the legal issues if you're interested. There's a lot of calls to OFAC to issue some FAQs on how people can try to comply with this without getting in trouble. And so that's a case I think it's going to be really important for folks to keep their eyes on. So that is intro to blockchain law in 30 minutes or less. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. If your head is spinning, that is okay. Here's how you can reach me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I also really encourage folks to connect with the center either through social media, come to our conference, you can look at our blog, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Michele. This was great. I sort of want to go back to law school. Not ever. I minored in law a long time ago, but I'm like, ooh, this is so exciting. Yeah, it sounds like there's still lots of work to do. One question that I want to start this off with is like, from your perspective, from your law perspective, how can you build a career in crypto, and what would your advice be for students?
So that's a great question, because I think one of the parts of this, because it's such a high learning curve, people tend to be very intimidated by it. So if you're not at a university that offers a blockchain law course, and there's not many of us yet, hopefully there soon will be, I think the best thing to do is to find ways to self-educate in this space. There's a lot of certificate programs. There's a lot of just free online resources, which I know Doro will announce some of them in a bit. But I also really encourage you to get involved. I hate to tell law students to do Twitter because I feel like it really takes away from the skills you need to succeed in law school. So maybe just do it on the weekends or 5-10 minutes a day. But there's a lot of crypto lawyers on Twitter, and you can learn a lot by just following a few of them, a handful of folks in this space and who really know the issues. And then I would also say, trying to find free events and free conferences to network with lawyers in this space. Depending on where you are, you might have a very small community of attorneys, or you might have a very large one. Here in San Francisco, we have a very large network of blockchain lawyers. If you're in a smaller city or one that doesn't yet have a blockchain industry, you can actually be one of the first people to build it. And you don't have to know everything in order to do that.
Thanks, Michele. Ria has a question. She is asking, what are some steps blockchain developers can take to help the legal landscape?
Oh, what a great question, because I'm going to put a call out to educate. I will tell you, I actually invited a developer, a wonderfully smart, incredible developer to my class, my first semester teaching blockchain law. And he coded a smart contract on the whiteboard for the law students. And I looked at their faces, and their faces were like, oh, and they said, do we have to know this? Will this be on the exam? And I said, no. I think people are afraid of, if you went to law school, you're probably not so great at coding, right? That there's exceptions to that. But for a lot of folks, they chose law because it was more intuitive for them than coding. And so trying to find ways to educate attorneys in this space would be so helpful. Even just basic coding 101 that you offer to students at a law school near you would actually be really useful. And from there, then let's start training regulators, which is, of course, what the center's doing. And so if you're interested in helping us with that, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Michele. Deshaun has a question. He or she writes, can minting an NFT be considered copywriting something in the future because of the way the blockchain works with a timestamp?
Okay, great. So I'm not a copyright attorney, but let me say this. The traditional view was that when you bought an NFT, the copyright did not travel with the purchase, meaning that the owner of an NFT does not also own the rights to the copyrights to it. So I'll give you an example. I own an NFT, but I don't have licensing rights attached, and so I can't make t-shirts and sell them. with my NFT. This is actually changing now. So Yuga Labs, which is the company that bought the Bored Apes, they have released the IP rights with those NFTs, which of course made the NFTs go way up in value, because now you hold not just the NFT, you also hold the right to, in my example, make t-shirts and sell them based on the NFT. So my answer to the question is, this is changing really quickly. And so at the moment though, it's up to the creator of the NFT and whatever platform they're selling on to make sure they spell out the copyrights as clearly as possible that are attached or not attached to that NFT.
Thank you. Paolo has a question. How do we legislate and standardize laws and policies across multiple countries or jurisdictions?
Okay, so when I was, this is a really good question, and I'm laughing because when I was on the California blockchain working group, part of my job was to go around the state and talk to industry folks. And uniformly, what I was told was, we need uniform regulation. Have California create the same laws and regulations as New York, as Wyoming, as Texas. And there was no way that was going to happen, right? Why? Because there's no incentive for Wyoming to slow down so that the huge state of California can keep up, right? Texas, Wyoming, New York, California are all competing with each other for blockchain business. So there is this race going on. And California is much slower. We're doing this very deliberately, partly because, you know, we are like the Titanic, right? Turning this ship is really difficult, but we also can't get it wrong because we just have too many stakeholders, millions of residents. We can't get this wrong. More nimble states like Wyoming are able to move really quickly. If you extrapolate that out to the question, which is, can countries create a global uniform regulatory approach, you're going to bump into the same thing, which is there's no reason for Estonia to slow down to allow the United States to catch up. That being said, there is some talk about things like global self-regulatory organizations potentially creating global standards, which has been done before in the financial regulatory networks. And so there are some examples of ways it could happen, but I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon.
Cool. Maybe the last question in the interest of time is from Alan. He asks, what implications do you see for the tokenization of real estate?
Okay, this is a very quickly growing industry. Like 3 years ago, no one mentioned real estate to me. And now this is probably the 5th time I've talked about real estate in the last month. So the reason that real estate is becoming a growing area here is because of the idea that you can use smart contracts to execute real estate sales. You could, technically that's possible. You also could tokenize a land asset and put it on a blockchain as an NFT. And so I'm not going to go too far into the technical areas around that, but what happens, let's use the first example. What happens if I create a smart contract for the sale of my house? I have just done a wonderful thing from a financial perspective. I have cut out the real estate agents and all their fees. I've cut out lawyers and all their fees. All I had to do was code a smart contract that laid out the party's intent, right? So let's say, Doro, I'm going to use you as my example. I sell my house to you. You pay the money, contract executes, title goes to you. Then you show up with a moving van and I refuse to give you my keys. And I refuse to leave the house. So sure, the contract was self-executing, but how in the real world are we going to enforce that contract? And so there are people working on this. One of my colleagues is about to publish a paper on creating things. Spencer Williams is going to publish something on enforcement oracles. There's lots of interesting approaches you could take to real world enforcement. But I think and you could also put title registry on a blockchain. There's a lot of exciting development in the real estate space.
Nice. Maybe one last question from Nikhil. It just popped up. He's asking, Wyoming became the first state to allow DAOs to register and operate in the state as limited liability companies. This allows DAOs the same legal rights and protections as traditional business entities. If I set something up in Wyoming, will I be protected in New York?
Oh, okay. So I'm not giving legal advice. Want to make that clear. I am neither licensed in Wyoming nor New York, and so I'm not going to be giving advice. The answer is we're going to see how this works. This is brand new, right? So yes, Wyoming was first to be able to allow DAOs to do this. I will include that Wyoming was first to allow LLCs to operate in their state. They're really forward thinking in lots of ways there. New York has a much more cautious approach to this. And so what you're asking me about is essentially interstate jurisdiction. Will the jurisdiction of New York recognize a DAO that is incorporated or organized in Wyoming? I think we're going to have to see. They're certainly not going to pass a statute that says, we hereby recognize Wyoming DAOs. There's no reason for New York to do that. Mostly because of the race I just talked about, right? Everybody's racing for the business of this. I think it's going to come up in litigation, most likely in a court, and it remains to be seen.
Thank you. Thanks, Michele. There's some other people asked about Twitter follow recommendations for the lawyers that you mentioned, and also the link to your article that you mentioned at the very beginning. If you can, please put that in the chat, because some people asked about it. I know there's more questions coming, but in the interest of time, we're going to continue on. And I know there were some questions about the shuffle too. So thank you, Michele. Thank you for your time. This was super interesting, and I can see from the community how there's lots of questions and lots of work to be done. So thank you very much for that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thanks. I also enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And as Michele mentioned, I just want to go over some free learning resources that we offer to students. So if you're a beginner in blockchain, I can recommend the Blockbeam program, Gateway to Algorand. It's free, it's cohort-based for an undergraduate audience from all over the world. The next cohort starts in mid-December. We're also working together with the DeFi Talents program coming out of the Frankfurt Blockchain Center. They run a program in English, also cohort-based with a DeFi focus. And then our Algorand Center of Excellence at the University of Florida, they just started a very introductory course called Introduction to Algorand, Use Cases and Other Classes. You can just go to the website and sign up. It's a self-paced video course. And then for the developers among you who want to learn more about how to build on Algorand, check out our technical resources. The Algorand School on GitHub, the second bullet here in the technical section, is the GitHub from Cosimo Bassi, who is behind all the carbon neutrality calculations at Algorand Inc. He's a really phenomenal guy. And if you're interested in learning more, his GitHub is really great. And last but not least, the Zero to Hero PyTeal course is on YouTube. We're also getting it translated into Chinese right now. It's a free 12-lesson course where you can really learn how to build on PyTeal and learn how to do the first basic things. I also want to encourage you to join our community, and for those of you who are thinking about starting your crypto career, join our Discord channel. We have a special section just for student clubs. My colleague Eva, who's here in the chat too, she's our student engagement lead. So please hop on the Discord if you're a student, you want to learn more about blockchain and blockchain law or anything blockchain related. That's your channel. For those of you who are a member of a blockchain club or you want to start one, also please reach out to Eva. Eva, maybe you want to put your LinkedIn and your Twitter on the chat. We soon will launch a global organization for student clubs, and we're very keen to hear from as many as you as possible. In general, our advice is, be an active member of your blockchain community, just like Michele outlined. Go to those meetups, go to the conferences. Even if you're a beginner, it's totally fine. The blockchain community is super welcoming. So if you want to learn more, just attend events, maybe volunteer at the crypto conference, participate in hackathons. For example, Algorand Foundation is running the Greenhouse Hacks. Greenhouse Hack number 2 is starting off next week. And yeah, be active on Twitter, on Discord, and really we always recommend do your own research. Like, don't believe because somebody or your friend or your uncle said this and that is the way to do on the way to go forward. Like, always do your own research, ask questions, don't be shy, and really look into things. I also want to underline some upcoming events. So on September 1 and September 6, for those of you who are down under, join our events in Victoria. September 27th, for those of you who are in Singapore, in the nearby region, we will have our tech talks. And then in October, my colleague Eva and I will hold an in-person event at Oxford University. So stay tuned for more information. And last but not least, Michele's Blockchain Law for Social Good conference. I posted the link in the chat and in the questions, and it's linked on the slide deck. So please give that a look. And if you're in the area, please join her for that. The NFT shuffle for all of those of you who attended today, we will email you by the end of the week and send you instructions on how you can join the shuffle. We'll ask for some information from you, and then it's a really fun way to get one of you tigers from our friends at TigerG. So you can see some examples here. And last but not least for this presentation, please scan that code and participate in our event survey. As I said earlier, Eva and I are working on really building out our student program. So we just want to know how you like the event and what your general interests are. The survey shouldn't take longer than 3 minutes. And some lucky respondents will receive a nice Algorand swag package. So please participate. If you have 2 or 3 minutes, it probably won't even take that long. It would be super helpful for our team to make sure we run events that are of interest to you. And here, you asked before, please connect with Michele and me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Here are codes. I think Sarah also posted Michele's LinkedIn on the chat. We are happy to answer any questions. And yeah, we're always happy to have students here. So if there's follow-up questions, reach out. We're happy to be here for you. On that note, Michele, thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate it. I also want to do a special thank you to my colleague, Sarah. It's her last day tomorrow at Algorand Foundation, but she was pretty much in charge of this event. She put it all together. She did an amazing job, and this is a nice finale to her internship. So thank you, Sarah. Thanks for everyone who's here. I saw there's people like from Africa, from Finland, from the United States. It's really nice to see such an international crowd. So yeah, thank you very much on behalf of the team, and all of you will get the slide deck and the recording shortly after this ends, right?
Just one quick one, Dora. The recording goes out automatically the minute the event finishes to both registrants and all attendees, and then I'll send out the email with the link to the presentation to all the attendees and registrants tomorrow.
Oh, thank you.
It doesn't go out automatically, but I'll send that out to all the registration list tomorrow.
Awesome, cool. Well, on that note, thanks everyone, and we hope to see you soon in another webinar. Thank you, Michele, again. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Doro.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.